Taking a look at our top story for this hour, the three-day summit of the world's 7 richest leaders have come to an end. We will be crossing to our correspondent in Cornwall. Just before that, though, we are going to chat to SABC foreign editor Sophie Mokoena to give us another perspective of the weekend's unfoldings. Sophie, a very good evening. Thank you for joining us once again. The G7 summit has come to an end today. Many issues on the agenda in response to China's vaccine diplomacy, infrastructure, and also discussing some of the plans to tackle climate change have emerged. I want to know from you, in terms of measures to counter China's influence on the continent, how are these proposals looking in comparison?
Well, let's start with the outcomes. I think the main issue is the support for poorer countries on issues of vaccines, but also the infrastructure and the announcement that the G7 leaders have adopted a plan to impose tax 15% to all the multinational companies that are doing business in their countries or outside their respective countries. Therefore, earlier on, President Joe Biden tried to clarify this money that they have put aside to build the infrastructure on the continent, including other countries in the developing nations. Many people are saying that this is a way to push back China. Let's hear what President Joe Biden had to say.
We also made a momentous commitment at the G7 to help meet more than $40 trillion need that exists for infrastructure in the developing world. I put forward an idea that was called, we named the Build Back Better World Partnership, which is, we're calling it the B3W. The point is that what's happening is that China has its Belt and Road Initiative, and we think that there's a much more equitable way to provide for the needs of countries around the world. And so it's a values-driven, high-standard, transparent financing mechanism we're going to provide and support projects in 4 key areas: climate, health, digital technology, and gender equity.
Lizelle, Prime Minister Boris Johnson spoke about the commitment to help poorer nations in terms of early warning systems to ensure that in future they are able to deal with pandemics. He spoke about building capacity, but also saying that they must also have capacity to be able to trace and do research in terms of origin of different vaccines that are, that are prominent on the continent and also in the world in general. Let us listen to what Prime Minister Boris Johnson had to say.
As you know, we're having a new treaty on pandemic preparedness and to make sure the world works better in the future in tackling zoonotic diseases like this, and indeed all types of disease. And one of the things that we agreed to do was to strengthen the World Health Organization and to make sure that their inspectors can have powers similar to those used by the OPCW or the IAEA or other inspectors who can, weapons inspectors who can go on the scene and try to determine as independently as possible exactly what is going on, so that people can have confidence about the etiology of these diseases, the origins of these diseases. So hopefully in the future, a lot of this obscurity will be dispelled.
The other thorny issue is the issue of imposing tax to these multinational companies that are doing business around the world, 15%. Let's take a listen at what President Ramaphosa had to say when you look at whether South Africa can support such a move.
The G7 countries have come up with a proposal which has been discussed and is still going to be discussed on a taxation mechanism which we have not had time to discuss. But it's what they have discussed, and clearly they see the taxation level that they've come up with, that at least it should be 15%. And I read that to mean that that's the floor and it can be higher than that, which I'm sure will fit their own economies. And taxation is very different in various countries around the world. Some tax as much as 70% and some tax as low as 15% or so. So that needs to be looked at. And us in developing economies, obviously, we've got to take a lot of things into consideration because the revenue challenge is quite huge. Our tax base is quite narrow. And in the G7 countries, the tax base is broad, both for personal income tax and for corporate tax. So in our case, there's a misalignment, and we therefore need to look at all that, and we must have the equation balancing properly. So it is a G7 determination, and we have heard, we have listened, and we were here also to watch some of these things.
Sophie, a lot has come out of this weekend summit that's ultimately going to change the geopolitical landscape. Biden's next foreign trip engagement is meeting with NATO and Putin. I wonder if you could explore what is on the agenda beyond advocating for transatlantic unity.
Well, clearly he's going to speak about strengthening the relations with NATO. You know that under President Donald Trump, the relations were very frosty and also very shaky. And therefore, NATO is looking forward to host President Joe Biden in Brussels this coming week. Let's take a listen at what the head of NATO had to say about the presidency of President Joe Biden.
He is a strong supporter of NATO, the transatlantic bond, and all allies welcome his very clear message on the importance of reinvigorating the bond between Europe and North America in NATO.
NATO looking forward to engage with President Joe Biden, Lizelle?
Absolutely, and we're just looking at the changes that have happened amongst some of the G7 members, especially in the United States of America. I think to round off this conversation, perhaps can we explore some of the G7 permanent members and their positioning in terms of, advocating for a more united front? Do they walk away from this weekend having achieved that?
They have, in terms of bringing back the United States of America, but there are still challenges. You know, the problem of Brexit. You saw President Macron, the French president, kind of holding a different view in terms of the implementation of Brexit, almost having some divergent view from what Boris Johnson is saying, particularly on issues that are related to the territory of the United Kingdom. And that nearly drowned the conference or the meeting, but they were able to again focus on issues at hand as they did in terms of also addressing the issue of climate change. But there are still issues that they really have to iron out.
All right, SABC News foreign editor Sophie Mokoena just giving us an update on the latest emerging after the closing of the G7 summit.